You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm Weston Williams, joined once again by Oliver Camacho. All right, this week we go inside the huddle with Yuval Sharon, the stage director, author, and administrator who is famous for the parking lot Gotterdammerung and Backwards Boheme, TM. He's currently exploring artificial intelligence in his new concept for Cosi fan Tutte. Sharon joins us to preview that upcoming production for Detroit Opera and to answer the age-old question, is there any opera in the standard canon that is fine just the way it is? And then it's our annual March Madness bracket. Find out which summer opera festivals made it to the Sweet 16, and we put the call out to you to help pick the Elite 8. Plus, in the 2-minute drill, the Laffont competition crowns 5 singers, and JD Vance gets booed at the Kennedy Center. That's good news for most of us. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify. Click follow. On Apple Podcasts, hit the plus sign. Email us your hot takes by writing to mailbag at operaboxscore.com or upload a voice memo using the You Got Something to Say tab on our website, operaboxscore.com. However you contribute, you'll get an OBS beer coaster, an OBS lapel pin, and a #1 OBS fan foam finger just for sharing your own hot take. And without further ado, Oliver Camacho, it's been you and me for a while now.
I don't know what to say, everybody. Our colleagues are, they have lives. I guess we don't.
Unlike us.
We love opera more than we love our families, I guess.
It's so true. I have been assured that at least one of them will be back next week, but who knows which one, or if it'll be both.
Yeah,
or...
I mean, I thought that Nathan Granner, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that interview, but he might make a great co-host if he wasn't male. Not that being male disqualifies you, but in this age of DEI initiatives getting terminated, we need to be even more inclusive than ever,
Speaking of being inclusive, I must now reach out and be tolerant of your tennis obsession.
No, it's just that Carlos Alcaraz lost to the eventual winner of the Indian Wells tournament. I am glad that Jack Draper, the very handsome 23-year-old British player, that he demolished his opponent in the final. So it makes me feel like, okay, Jack Draper was in amazing form, but it's really sad to see Carlos Alcaraz lose. He was doing he was like sailing through the earlier rounds with ease. So it seemed like it was his to lose, and it really was his to lose. There is such thing as the Sunshine Double. It's the Indian Wells, which bumps up against the Miami Open, which has already started its early round. So there's a chance for Alcaraz to take some trophy back to Europe after his Sunshine Double here in the States. I'm so sorry. It's just not a good year so far. 2025 can kick rocks.
Yeah, I think that's the #1 worst thing that's happened this year. Let's talk some opera.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
We have been trying to get Yuval Sharon on this show since, I think, before you were born, Weston. I'm so grateful to the PR team at Detroit Opera for finally making it happen. The main topic of our discussion is going to be Yuval's upcoming concept for Cosi fan Tutte. And this could have been an episode devoted entirely to Cosi fan Tutte, but I think we'll wait until Matt's around so we can... Oh, Ashley actually also loves Cosi fan Tutte, so you're not a Cosi guy, are you?
I'm more of a Hans Werner Henze guy, which is completely different in every way.
No, but of the Mozart operas that you know, which one do you like the best?
Oh,
you're
gosh.
Like a Don Giovanni, aren't you?
I'm probably Don Giovanni. I do have my Marriage of Figaro moments, believe it or not, but yeah.
Okay, without further ado, please welcome Yuval Sharon.
Thanks so much, Oliver. I'm so happy to be here.
We're going to talk about the Cosi that's coming up in Detroit. But just in case the audience doesn't remember, one of your trademarks, I guess what we might say, is your reimagination of canonical works in one occasion as a COVID restriction kind of contingency. But even post-COVID, this backward boheme is something that I think got your name out there. Can you just talk about why we need to necessarily reimagine canonical works for contemporary audiences?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I really do believe that the operatic repertoire is much more flexible and generative and open than we sometimes give it credit for. We can often kind of fall in a trap of feeling like we already know what these works are all about. And so to do this, we have to do that. If we're going to do Mozart, it has to look this way, it has to sound this way, it has to have all of these things that are actually, in many cases, don't have much to do with the work anymore, but have to do with its many, many generations of received tradition, some of which is really useful. I mean, we don't need to throw out everything from the past, but I think we should always be questioning, well, why do we make the choices that we do when we perform a Mozart opera or a Puccini opera or a Monteverdi opera? And is there another way of doing it? Is there a way in which we, in our present moment, can actually add to this incredible work and make it feel like it's completely of our time as well as of its time? And I think that there is absolutely a place for historic reenactments of certain musical ideas. And we also have an incredible archive at our fingertips and our phones on YouTube, on all kinds of places. But to come into a space in 2025, for example, in Detroit, for me, I think the Cosi fan tutte that we would do in Detroit right now should really feel so of its moment, the way it was when Mozart first wrote it. And so I think that trying to connect these ideas and these pieces to what it is that we're thinking about now is really a part of the process.
We're going to get to Cosi in a second, but just for the sake of argument, is there an opera that is accepted to be in the standard canon, whatever era, that you think is actually the right aesthetic and the right story without tampering with it for 2025?
I mean, let me put it this way. I don't actually think about it as tampering. So I'm going to maybe just question that word first, because that kind of implies that I don't think they work. And so I need to fix it. Mm-hmm. Now, in the case of Cosi, we might get to that. Like, Cosi does need our interpretational involvement for it to actually be a meaningful project now. But there are many, many operas in which, you don't have to set them backwards. You don't have to put them on the moon. You don't have to do these things. But we might also learn a lot about these pieces by trying new things with them. For example, saying that, maybe we have even, this is also sometimes on a micro level of we're so used to hearing a certain type of vocal production in relation to a certain type of role. And what does it mean to bring new artists in that bring new colors to the way that we hear these pieces and think about them differently? So I just think that every time we perform something live, we have just as much responsibility to our time than we do to its time. In fact, we don't have that much responsibility to its time anymore. We have every responsibility to our time. And we have, and just to put it, to not overstate the case, we did some productions in Detroit Opera that really didn't have, they were very well directed without needing a high concept framework. And that's perfectly fine too. There's not one size fits all with opera. And I would argue that I believe that so much that when I see other opera companies where there aren't these kind of liberties taken and interpretational freedoms given, that I just think surely at least one production during the year can be something in which we maybe learn something new about these pieces, as opposed to maybe just reproducing the things we know.
Well, it's a way of actually, the question was a way of trying to figure out who you are and what is your, what do you agree with without having to think about it? What it's like, yes, give me whatever Midsummer Night's Dream, the way Britain intended it, or the way Britain imagined it,
Yeah, no. I mean, it's an important part of my process always to try and imagine what composers were doing when they wrote this piece. What were they thinking? What was happening in their moment? But I don't anticipate the audience needing to know that to understand the piece. So like the audience that's actually coming to see it is coming from our own world and from our own perspective. And what could I do in staging a piece that can help bring out that, like, help build that bridge between the audience as it is now and our experience of life right now with what Mozart was thinking, what Puccini was thinking, what any of these composers were thinking. And I actually think that radical choices are worth doing. Like, we should be experimenting. I'll bring Mozart up as a prime example. A lot of people have an image of Mozart as a kind of angelic, like, cherub figure. There's actually paintings of him almost looking like it's like Sistine Chapel style. Looking down from heaven, and he's just so perfect. I mean, the music he wrote was so sublime. But I actually really think that what makes Mozart so endearing is the fact that he was such a trickster, and he was always pulling pranks on his audience. And the movie Amadeus is such a great example of this, where you just get to see this rambunctious, wild kid that Salieri's looking at and saying, how could such divine heavenly music come from the perspective of someone who seems such such an animal in so many ways and bucks all of civil trends, and it's something that we sometimes forget with Mozart, that he was like an overturner of conventions as much as he was a standard bearer. And so I keep thinking, like, we want that aspect of Mozart too, and we don't often see that when we keep productions in a framework that is familiar to us.
Well, staying on the topic of Mozart, I am a big Mozart guy, and Cosi is my favorite opera. I've said it many times on this show. And I feel Mozart, pushing against what was expected and really handing the baton over to somebody like Beethoven. Fiordiligi is like the last opera seria character. I mean, he wrote a couple more, but I mean, she's like she's trying really hard to be virtuous. She's trying really hard to hang on to this idea of what opera was, even though all of her surroundings are going comic. Even her sister, who was with her, is going comic, So I feel like it's, in a way, so modern for 1790 or 89 or whatever it was written, And I know that it has a lot of, libretto has problems, but I think the story doesn't have a problem. And clearly the music is just genius. So,
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's such great music.
There's some program notes that your PR person sent me to read before talking to you. And I forget, I should credit this person because it was a really great essay. But one of the things that's in this essay is the idea of having to defend Mozart. And that Cosi is an opera that the real Mozart, like, lovers, the people who are so devoted to Mozart, find themselves defending, almost in the way Fiordiligi is defending her opera seria, bona fides, So with that as a starting point, what does Cosi mean to you? And what, I understand, like, we're going to get into this idea of, like, the characters are puppets, but do you love Cosi as an opera for its own sake?
Yeah, I love Cosi as an opera so much. And then there are the challenges with Cosi that just feel like, as a stage director, it's really exciting to think, well, how can we solve some of these challenges? And it's what I love about opera is it's never stationary. It is actually incredibly flexible and always open. And I think there's a lot of possibilities. My interpretation that's going to open a Detroit Opera is one of those possibilities. It's not the only one. And it may not be, knowing you're a Cosi fan, and I don't know if you're actually going to be able to come see this or not, but, this may not be the solutions for the piece that you might endorse, but for other people, it may be a way in that they might otherwise be that might otherwise feel closed off to them. I can talk about all the things that I love about it. The primary thing being, it's such a deep investigation about subjectivity and free will, and this notion of what makes us special. Are we even special at all? And I think we have to, like, when I hear Cosi, I really think about the fact that this is the end of a trio that he wrote with De Ponte that began with Marriage of Figaro which is so humanistic and so warm and so truly a believer in humankind. That humankind ultimately is about forgiveness, is about grace, is about the equality of all of the classes, where the countess and a servant can sing a duet together like two sisters. There's so much that's just utopian and positive in Marriage of Figaro, which lines up really well with kind of like the promise of the French Revolution, which was kind of brewing at this point, right? Then we have Don Giovanni, and we have a much darker look at humanity, but it's not fully dark yet. We have this notion that the individual freedom that the French Revolution was expressing has a dark side, has a shadow, and that maybe our society isn't quite ready for that shadow to be unleashed on the world, as Don Giovanni sort of represents. You may remember one of the great moments in Don Giovanni is when he is forcing everyone to sing Viva la Libertà, Viva la Libertà. It's like the least free music that Mozart ever wrote, is this like absolutely just authoritarian, crushing sense of freedom, 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 freedom. And it's like freedom for who? Freedom for this one guy, not freedom for anybody else. So we're already starting to get this kind of look that like, well, maybe this utopia that we were promised, maybe there is this darker side to it. Then you get to Cosi, and now it's actually an existential crisis where we just get this feeling of we don't quite know what the future holds. And we have a character like Despina saying something like, we are going to just forget the past because the past doesn't help us anymore. and there is something very powerful and disruptive in Cosi, even though on the surface, it's kind of a comedy of errors type story of mismatched lovers, and one's, seducing the other and trying to fool the other, and disguises, and all of these kind of tropes of comedy, which I think is actually really beautifully put, Oliver, that Fiordiligi is the one opera seria character who's trying to hold on to something meaningful, but like this notion of all of our traditional values are rapidly deteriorating around these characters, and Fiordiligi's like our last hope, Mm-hmm. And she may succumb, but even though she succumbs, there's something about the way that she nevertheless has this interiority and this deep feeling that Mozart gave her that nevertheless gives us a sense in a faith in humanity. And so
she still has shame. She's the only one that has shame.
Oh, absolutely. She's ashamed even at the thought of it. Before she sings her great aria, Per Pietà, she has not cheated on her lover, but she just thinks that even the thought of cheating on her lover is something that is below her worth. And it's there's a way of saying like, well, she's somebody who's really by her surroundings, but she's almost more like how Nietzsche would call it, that she loves her fate, she loves her destiny, and she is fully embodied in her destiny. And actually, she is the great character in the opera for sure.
So
anyway, there's a lot to talk about here. Yeah.
Can we take the idea of destiny and carry it over to your concept for the Detroit opera production?
Yes, absolutely. It is free will, and the notion of, do these characters have free will at all? Probably the thing that people have the biggest issue with Cosi, it's not the music, but two big topics. One is a kind of blatant misogyny as expressed by Don Alfonso, the kind of patriarchal head of the entire opera. That's one thing that you must grapple with if we're doing the opera in 2025, and not relativize it and not say, oh, well, you had to be there. Like if you were in Mozart's time, this would have been a little saucy, but it's okay. But we're just going to keep doing it not critically. I can't imagine that being a viable path for this opera. So you have to address the misogyny. And the other thing is what I hear from a lot of people saying, but the four lovers are such cookie cutter characters. They're just almost like archetypes. Other than Fiordiligi gains individuality over the course of the opera, but she doesn't start with Per Pietà. She starts singing in these quite frankly, robotic, parallel lines with her sister, in which the two of them at the beginning are completely interchangeable. And, Mozart obviously could have done this very differently, but instead he makes them just feel like they are these two malleable new creations, And actually, the men don't do much better, to be totally honest. The two male lovers don't do much better too. They often also sing in this kind of lockstep that when you know that he's already done Don Giovanni and Marriage of Figaro, Mozart it's not an accident. Like, he's choosing to make them very artificial seeming. And if you're thinking about Fiordaligi's great aria Per Pietà, you can compare it to her first act aria, Come Scoglio, which actually does have it's quite literal. There's a rigidity about this character, when she's first singing.
It's a Handel aria, actually. That's right. There's a Handel aria that has like almost the same text. It's like, oh, okay, this is where Mozart is getting this, So.
Yes, well, and Per Pietà as well. Like, Per Pietà is also, it's something that also comes up. These characters don't speak from a place of originality, funny enough. They're always invoking things that seem so far beyond them. They're talking about Greek mythology. They're comparing themselves to famous lovers in the Odyssey or to the Oresteia. There's this feeling that they are puppets and that they are a kind of manipulation of Alfonso. And actually, that's how the whole opera is set up. It's the subtitle is A School for Lovers. So we decided for our production, we're going to take that a step further. We're going to make it the laboratory for lovers, in which we have these young lovers that are the machines that Don Alfonso is making and is testing, and to see at what point, if he pushes their buttons hard enough, at what point do they break? And is it possible that they've created an operating model that's so good that it can withstand the pressure, or are they stuck to replicate the behavior of everyone that preceded them? And so in many ways, making sense of this story is very natural when we think about it in relation to artificial intelligence. And I have the feeling we don't have enough time for me to go into all the details about it, but the notion that Mozart, especially in Cosi, is exploring what, like, if we as individual subjects might in fact actually be the manipulated automaton of some higher power, and maybe that higher power is not benevolent. And maybe that higher power that's trying to manipulate us is doing it just for a kind of cynical, dark, misanthropic view of what humanity's all about, which in our case is Don Alfonso. Why is he setting up this experiment? What is it for? It got to be, he's got to have some reason, which Mozart leaves completely opaque. There is absolutely where Fiordaligi has so much interiority, Don Alfonso, who's the engine of the whole piece, has zero. And so he makes him the most interesting character of the entire opera. And we've developed him quite a bit for our production.
Well, we have exactly a minute left, and I would love to talk about all of your cast. I'm crazy about Olivia Bowen, but I want to just spend a little time hearing what you think about Anne Toomey. I have my own ideas about what she brings to the table. She's one of the most versatile artists I've ever met in terms of what she could do vocally and her acting. But what's going to make her like the ideal Despina for this production?
Oh, well, because she's also rebellious, and the Despina that I had in my mind was a true revolutionary. I can't give away exactly what she's going to do, but as soon as we decided that the women especially were going to be extremely robotic, and like the story of a sense of self-consciousness and gains a sense of interiority, Olivia Bowen, Emily Fons, and Anne Toomey all are giving such incredible performances and very convincing robot physicality, I have to also say. But that they all three completely responded to this prompt and to this notion of what if they're all robots, and are completely gung-ho doing this in a way that is thrilling and really exciting. And I think bringing a lot of life to these characters. And that's not to say, that's not to exclude our men, who are also absolutely wonderful. Joshua Blue as Ferrando, Thomas Lehman as Guglielmo, and Edward Parks, who's doing Alfonso, which is very against type, because normally Alfonso is an old, quote unquote, older and wiser philosopher type. But for us, he is one of these tech visionaries who believes that he knows how to make the world a better place. and in which when you're 40 years old, you're already an old man in the tech sphere, right? So Ed, as a younger and more virile kind of performer as he is bringing a totally different kind of energy for Don Alfonso.
And he was in the Steve Jobs opera, wasn't he?
Well, see, that's part of why I was thinking about him. Yeah. He was both a very remarkable Steve Jobs and also an excellent Jack from The Shining. And I'm like, well, Don Alfonso has elements of both of those two. So that's why I really thought of it.
Horrifying.
Yes.
Detroit Opera's Cosi fan tutte, directed by Yuval Sharon, opens April 5th. There are 3 performances, April 11th and April 13th. Yuval, thank you so much for being our guest. I hope to have you back when we have a little more time.
I totally hope so too, Oliver. Thank you so much, and hope to see you at the show.
Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify. Click follow on Apple Podcasts. Hit the plus sign. You know, it's that time of year again, which means it's almost summer. But more to the point, it's March.
Opera class. Sports radio crass. This is Opera Box Score.
Well, it's that time of year again, as Weston says. And now without George, we're left to our own devices on how to participate in March Madness.
I will say, Oliver, we've done the March Madness bracket every year, I think, since I've joined the show. It was many years now. But this is the first time where I feel like I'm doing it without a net because George isn't here.
Well, I do know that yesterday, March 16th, is what they call Selection Sunday. Ooh. So we're not that far off with our selecting the topic for this year's March Madness. And because there's only 2 of us, we're already going to be in the round of what they call the Sweet 16 round.
Yeah.
And we're going to ask you, our dear listeners, to help us pick the Elite 8. And this year's March Madness bracket is all about summer festivals. So to qualify for the summer festival, you have to have performances of opera between the months of June and, let's say, early September. We're going to do 16 4 quadrants, and each quadrant will represent a country that is known for their summer festivals. Sadly, in order to include America, we had to drop Italy. So if we ever do this again, we promise to give Italy its proper love. But
we can have an all-Italian March Madness next year.
On the, I don't even say the left side of the bracket, on the
I think the left side is going to be sort of our Anglophone side. We're going to have two quadrants, I guess. We got the UK in one and the US in the other. So let's break down. Let's start with the good old US of A. You know, we live here. So the first matchup in this bracket, and you should be writing it down because we're going to ask you to help us pick the winners for the Elite 8 here. But the first matchup is going to be Santa Fe Opera, which, of course, we might have a slight bias there, Oliver. But we did pit them against another powerhouse, Glimmerglass Festival, which is going to be an interesting sort of matchup, overcoming our biases there. But Glimmerglass is definitely another powerhouse sort of coastal production, whereas Santa Fe is out in the middle of the desert. So I'll be interested to see what the matchup is like. I will also say, Oliver, this is about this season specifically, not necessarily the festival in general. So bear that in mind, dear listener, when you get mad at us for picking what you don't like.
And then our 2 entries in the other matchup are both from the Midwest. Friend of the show, Opera Theater St. Louis, and potential friend of the show, Des Moines Opera. Once again, as Weston says, as you are thinking about these matchups, take a look at the websites and the programs and look at the repertoire for each season.
Moving over to the UK, they speak English over there, allegedly. We have our first matchup, which is going to be Glyndebourne Festival, definitely a powerhouse over there, versus the Loughborough Festival, which is less of a powerhouse, but definitely like a known name.
It's definitely an opera festival. We looked it up.
we looked it up. We double checked. I'm actually very excited because I feel like, all I know about UK opera is Glyndebourne. So this is a nice opportunity for me specifically to learn a little bit more. And speaking of learning a little bit more about opera festivals in the UK, Oliver.
If we knew that there were some festivals in the UK that began with G besides Glyndebourne, and those are the Grange Festival.
Yes.
And Garsington Opera. And if I'm not mistaken, Garsington Opera has shared productions with Santa Fe. So I think they shared the Midsummer Night's Dream production and the Rosenkavalier production, both of which I really loved. So there might be something there with Garsington that we should consider more carefully.
So just to break it down, we've got the Anglophone side of the bracket. Glyndebourne versus Loughborough, Grange Festival versus Garsington Opera. Beneath that, we got the U.S., Glimmerglass versus Santa Fe, Des Moines versus Opera Theater St. Louis, and then we move over to the continent. We have sort of two areas, or regions, I should say. We've got Germany, Austria, sort of the German-speaking contingent, and the French quadrant. And let's break down the Germany-Austria bracket first, because I think this is the one that is, I think I personally had the most trouble figuring out which ones to pick for Germany and Austria because they have a lot of them. Mm-hmm. The first matchup is going to be the big Wagner daddy of them all, the Bayreuth Festspiele, Bayreuth, however you want to call it. And it is going to be going up against the Salzburg Festival in Austria. That sounds like a final matchup. Right there. Yeah, it really does. We also have underneath them the Bregenz Festival, also in Austria, versus the Munich Opera Festival in Munich. So we have kind of a interesting.
Oh, it's in Munich?
Yeah, okay. It is. It's got a sort of we have an interesting sort of mini sort of competition between Germany and Austria in both of those, but we'll see which ones come out in the long run. That's the German bracket. Oliver, because you can pronounce French, I leave the French bracket to you.
So we have the amazing Aix-en-Provence Festival versus a lesser known Opéra de Beaugé. Oui. And then the second matchup, it's one close to my heart, the Beaune Baroque Opera Festival versus the famous Festival d'Orange. So once again, the first matchup, Aix-en-Provence versus Opéra de Beaugé. Second matchup, Beaune versus Orange. So ultimately, we're going to have a fight between France and Germany/Austria, which
that always goes well.
And the winner from that half will go against English-speaking people, as Jesus intended.
Once again, the European bracket, the continental bracket, I should say, Germany, Austria, Salzburg versus Bayreuth, Munich Opera Festival versus Bregenz Festival, and then the French Aix-en-Provence versus Opéra de Beaugé, and then Beaune Baroque Opera versus Orange. It's going to be interesting. Let us know. Yeah. Go to mailbag@operaboxscore.com. We really do want to get your participation on this because usually we do this all unilaterally. And, we have our ideas of who might win certain brackets, but we really do want to make sure we're not being overly biased. So let us know before next week, because if we don't get it by Monday of next week, we're going to start making executive decisions over here for who should make it into the Elite Eight. Mailbag@operaboxscore.com, or you can go to our website, find the You Got Something to Say tab, and let us know there. And, if you know anyone who might be interested in this kind of head-to-head sportsy, opera-y competition, let them know about the podcast, period. Spread the word about Opera Box Score. Give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Tell a friend that they should listen. Force them to listen at gunpoint. However you do it, we will appreciate you and are not legally liable for your methods. 2-Minute Drill is right now.
This just in, the 2-Minute Drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
The 5 winners of this year's Metropolitan Opera Eric and Dominique Laffont competition are mezzo-sopranos Sadie Cheslick from Duluth, Minnesota, and Michelle Mariposa from Quezon City, the Philippines. Sopranos Elise Goretsky from Los Angeles and Emma Marhefka from Allentown, Pennsylvania. And baritone Luke Sutliff from Denver, Colorado. Each winner receives a $20,000 prize and the all-important Opera Box Score mention. Congratulations to all 9 of the finalists.
CBS's 60 Minutes took aim at President Trump's war on DEI by profiling a group of young Black, Hispanic, Indian, and Asian musicians who were denied the chance to play with the U.S. Marine Band. The plan was for an elite group of youth to perform with their adult counterparts at a concert in May, but Trump's executive order against diversity programs forced a cancellation of the performance. In defiance of the order, CBS broadcast a substitute concert featuring former members of the Marine Band with the young musicians to millions of viewers. And good news, it's available online for you to enjoy. Link in our show notes.
Former Kennedy Center President Deborah Rutter will deliver the keynote address at the Opera America conference later this year. The announcement was made weeks after she was ousted, along with most Kennedy Center leadership, who were replaced by Trump loyalists.
Speaking of the Kennedy Center, Vice President JD Vance was booed heavily when he made an appearance at a concert there last week. Current KC head Richard Grinnell posted a video on X admonishing viewers, quote, "This video should challenge us all to commit to making the Kennedy Center a place where everyone is welcomed. It troubles me to see that so many in the audience appear to be white and intolerant of diverse political views. We will not allow the Kennedy Center to be an intolerant place."
Cree composer Andrew Balfour missed his scheduled Carnegie Hall debut last week after being detained by U.S. border security. Upon landing in the U.S., Balfour chose to fly back to Toronto rather than remain in detention, and characterized the ordeal as being due to incorrect paperwork rather than his Indigenous heritage. That whole concert at Carnegie Hall was all about truth and love and compassion, he said. So I guess it's kind of ironic that I get turfed.
Major awards. Soprano Elizabeth Marlowe won first place in the voice category at the Young Texas Artist Competition, along with $5,000. The Farinelli competition also announced winners, all countertenors. Honduran Dennis Oriana won first prize, French Remy Brefouillet won second, and the third prize went to South Korean Yongbom Kwon. Meanwhile, bass baritone Tomasz Konieczny won the most major award of them all. New York State has proclaimed that March 8th was Tomasz Konieczny Day in recognition of his artistry and promotion of Polish culture in the state.
In trade news, Chautauqua Opera President Michael Hill is stepping down to take on a teaching position at Randolph-Macon College. No replacement has been named so far. Meanwhile, Venice's Teatro La Fenice has named Nicola Colabianchi to be its new intendanten, succeeding Fortunato Ortombina. And Arizona Opera's outgoing general director and president Joseph Spector has been named president and CEO of the Scottsdale-based Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation after the opera's season finale, Aida.
Exit stage right, she never wrote an opera, but the musical world was saddened by the death of Russian composer Sofia Gubaidulina. One of the most significant composers of the generation succeeding Dmitri Shostakovich, her music was marked by a deep spirituality combined with a distinctly individual modernist style. Gubaidulina's works were often blacklisted by the Soviet authorities, but she found international fame abroad, especially after the collapse of the USSR in 1991.
And on this day, March 17th, birthdays include French vocalist and harpsichordist and composer Elizabeth Jacquet de la Guerre, born this day in 1665. Jumping about 200 years to the birth of Italian tenor Giuseppe Borgatti, who created the role of André Chenier this day. He was born in 1871. Soprano Franca Somigli was born in Chicago in 1901, who sang in premieres of operas by Pizzetti, Vittadini, and Bianchi. On this day, March 17th, in 1930, American mezzo-soprano Betty Lou Allen was born in Campbell, Ohio. She created the role of Monisha in Joplin's Treemonisha. In 1933, mezzo-soprano Elizabeth Steiner was born in Berlin, who sang in premieres of operas by Koenig and Penderecki. First performances include two oratorios by Handel. Deborah in 1733 and 1749 saw the first performance of Solomon, both oratorios premiering in London. Giuseppe Verdi's Attila premiered at La Fenice on this day in 1846. Reinhold Glier's three-act opera Schach Zeinem premiered in Baku in 1923. In 1951, Victoria de Los Angeles made her debut at the Metropolitan Opera as Marguerite in Faust. In 1951, it was the premiere of Paul Dessau's opera Die Verhör des Lucullus, one of Weston's favorite, that premiered in East Berlin. And on March 17th in 1967, on this day, it was the first performance of Marvin David Levy's opera Morning Becomes Electra at the Metropolitan Opera.
And that's your 2-minute drill.
A hometown hero, Michelle Mariposa, who resides in Chicago, singing the Der Engel. That's too many articles. Singing Der Engel from Wagner's Wesendonck-Lieder. I met Michelle at Opera Theater of St. Louis last year. I don't think I heard her, but I met her, and I think I must have heard her at Chicago Opera Theater. I think she was a young artist here. I'm not sure, but at any rate, she's Filipino, so I am aligned with her no matter what.
Fully aligned. The battle lines have been drawn. You're on her side.
Yeah. And just a little bit of extra commentary on the Laffont competition. 4 out of the 5 finalists, winners, actually were or are current young artists at Santa Fe Opera. So Santa Fe is picking them. Either the Santa Fe is picking them or there's something fishy going on. Could be
once again,
both, yeah.
I reiterate, if you don't want Santa Fe to proceed to the Elite 8, you really got to message us now because, man, it's piling up.
Yeah. And I think Janai Brugger, I know she was this guest artist. I assume she sang something at the Laffont Finals concert, remembering that she won her own year as a Met. It used to be called the National Council Auditions.
Much easier to remember.
Yes. So I was at home watching 60 Minutes when this story was broadcast about these kids who auditioned to get the opportunity to play with the U.S. Marine Band. And then the concert was canceled. And so it was really cool. The Marine Band wanted to figure out how to give these kids this opportunity. And so since they're not allowed to play in this concert per their sergeant, what do you call the person who's the head of the military? That's the president. What's his
Commander-in-Chief?
It's the commander-in-chief. Won't let them. God, I'm so good at this. Won't let them play. Some of the retired Marine Band players formed an alternative band so that these kids could do the concert, which is available online. They played an excerpt of it on 60 Minutes. So already millions of people heard these kids perform and got to meet some of them. They were profiled. I doubt they would have been profiled had this not happened. So little good news, little bad news. It sucks, but you know.
I will say, as a former band kid myself, I know the esteem of the Marine Band specifically. You know, I know we have a lot of opera people specifically who are listeners, but if you were in marching band at all, like you knew about the Marine Band, you knew like what their deal was, you know how prestigious it is to be associated with them, to even see a concert from them, you know, is still a big deal. In many ways, it's a historical holdover of back in the day when military bands used to be, you know, part of battle in the, you know, 18th century and such, but it is still a tradition that holds a lot of weight to a lot of people, and having young kids, you know, of color participate is, you know, I think very much emblematic of the sort of the place that a lot of people want the country to be in, and to have that taken away was pretty sad, obviously, but also exciting that they were able to get former Marine Band members to come back, who were able to be like, yeah, this order is BS. We're going to come and play with you, I think is really cool. And, you know, speaking of people, of cool things happening, man, when I saw that video of JD Vance getting booed at the Kennedy Center, my soul, like, my heart grew 3 times, it's like the Grinch. It is so nice to see that level of disruption. Because I remind you, this is also at the Kennedy Center, right? We already know that they've lost about 50% of their ticket sales because of the Trump takeover. So the audience that was there were people who did not immediately drop their tickets upon hearing it. So this is like the most...
Was it an NSO concert?
I'm not entirely sure. It was with... I know the concert was, I think it was Stravinsky with Nozeta, so I assume it was.
Okay, yeah, NSO, yeah. So, yeah.
But seeing that, that was like the best possible audience to be amenable, the ones that stayed, the ones that saw the performance. And there are some videos where you can hear a couple of audience members, being like, be respectful. And like, there's one guy clapping, but the overwhelming boos whenever, JD Vance made his appearance known it kind of gave me hope for the first time in a couple of months that that is the minority. That is,
I feel where you're going with that. I'm a little bit nervous. I feel like if we game this out, JD Vance will probably become president because of the 25th Amendment. And what if he's more vindictive than Trump?
Is anyone more vindictive than Trump?
I don't know.
I think JD Vance doesn't have the confidence of Donald Trump, which is one of the reasons that I think, this was effective. Like he was squirming a little bit in some of the videos that I saw. In any case, I think that this ties into, just making it known that they are not, all powerful, that people around you are also feeling it. People all around you also know that this is, heinous, what's going on. And, it's coming together and, not really giving them any peace is probably the most effective tool we have, because legally it looks like there's not too much to be done because everyone at the top seems to be kind of folding. So it was nice. I enjoyed it. And even if it's kind of a, quixotic sort of booing, it's still, I can get behind a little bit of Don Quixote every now and again.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the Kennedy Center, there is this, I think it's a tweet going around about Richard Grenell saying that, why is there no money here? What is this financial situation? Doesn't
understand nonprofits.
Exactly. The Deborah Rutter, told me there's 0 cash on hand and 0 in reserves. That they've been digging into debt reserves, we must fix this great institution. The people working hard at the nation's premier performing arts center deserve better. And so do all Americans. It's like, you're an idiot. Welcome to the arts, buddy.
I know. It's your problem now.
Yeah.
I do think it does get at some sort of ideological, problems that, these kinds of people have with the arts, is that if it's not turning a profit, it doesn't have value, which of course is completely antithetical to the entirety of classical music, because there's no classical music, I think, anywhere that turns a profit reliably, certainly not in the United States. Acknowledging that there are things worth doing just because they're worth doing, like, social programs and making sure that people are being taken care of, even if it's not making the government any money. If taxes go towards, housing and stuff like that. It is a deeper sort of ideological issue that they're kind of blundering up against in a very, I think, way that is very unexpected for them. And I think that's kind of interesting from a historical perspective. I don't think it's a good thing by any means for anybody, but, certainly this is America, folks.
Before we wrap up the show, I just wanted to circle back to, we should talk about opera Michael Hill.
Yeah.
I wonder if Michael Hill sees the writing on the wall and it's like, okay, opera is not sustainable. So maybe teaching is better, or
maybe
is it
he's going to start an opera program at Randolph-Macon College?
Or maybe he just has been passionate about teaching this whole time and just realizes it. I don't know. But Chautauqua used to be one of the big ones, at least as far as like summer goes. And I feel like they were in our 2-minute drill maybe last year because they're like downsizing or something like that. So
yeah. I mean, I think, Chautauqua as a general concept has really been kind of defunct for a long time. I think it's a little bit greater than the opera. I think that a lot of other programs are becoming sort of phased out, even in the Chautauquas that do still exist. I think that, I've actually seen a performance or two at Chautauqua Opera, and like they really do good stuff. And I think that, it could be turned around there still, but maybe that's a fight that Michael is not willing to make. And, maybe the next person will be. We'll see what happens. Let's wrap this show up.
Good call. Bad call. On Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call. That's how we end the show around these parts. Obviously, good call is JD Vance being booed, but maybe you have another one for me, Oliver.
Well, for those of you who went to the HD broadcast of Fidelia, which I thought was pretty good. I think that obviously Ying Fang is my hero, but Lisa Davidson is somehow very convincing as a dude. And I was very confused. I was like, oh my God, what am I feeling here? Looking at Lisa Dawson with short hair, But best part, I hope you stuck around till the credits, because I do like this about the broadcast that, the curtain goes down and the camera is still backstage and you can see the artists like hugging each other and congratulating each other. And usually the HD is the last or near the last performance of the run. And you could see Lisa Davidson sort of breaking down because we know this is her last performance before she becomes a mother. She's not returning to the stage until next year. And that was a real moment. And say what you will about the HD broadcasts, but that for me was worth it just to see her. She's so powerful. We know she's so amazing. She's like a rock, but she's so human. And I really appreciated that little moment. So.
Yeah, I always stick around in the theaters after the Met broadcasts and the credits of Avengers movies, just in case. I have a good call, which I actually stole from you, Oliver. You introduced me to the High Note Society, which is created by Michael Bolton. I have not looked too much at the page, but at the site as a whole yet. I believe there's a paid thing and a members only forum and stuff like that. But specifically,
it's an audience education sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But specifically, what I think is really cool and really helpful, maybe just for us, but I think there are other people listening to this podcast who will genuinely find it helpful. Mike Bolton has literally put together a master list of opera companies and their 25-26 seasons in one place and pulled out highlights for those all over the country, which is incredible because if you are in the business, as you and I are, Oliver, of tracking down these press releases and finding press releases where you can find the information easily, they're written in completely different styles. It's always a mess. This is incredibly helpful. And it's also great if you are in the US and are considering jumping outside of the region of your local opera company, maybe jump a few states over if you have a upcoming trip to California or something, but you don't know what's going on over there opera-wise. This is a great resource at the High Note Society to let you know what kind of things are happening next season. It's all the stuff that Oliver and I missed. That is it for this week's edition of America's Talk Radio show about opera. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, get your voice heard, and find links to stuff we've talked about at our website, operaboxscore.com. That's also where you can put your money where our mouths are. Give back to the OBS using the Support the Team tab. Your announcer is Norm Waddell. Your creative consultant is Oliver Camacho, and your audio editor is me. The executive producer of the OBS is George Cedarquist. For our guest, Yuval Sharon, I'm Weston Williams, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you step down from your C-suite administrator job to teach at a Methodist liberal arts college. We're back with an all-new show next week when the Elite Eight of our March Madness of Summer Festivals is revealed. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more intolerant white audience members. Join us.